Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Jaya Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Jaya Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paribrajacharya Stotra Shata Shri Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Jaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayat Nasta Prayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttamasloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Om Jnanatimarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Rompada Swami Iti Nami. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Sarasate Deve Gauravani Prachadine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Pasyata Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Mukam Karoti Vachalam Angulam Gayate Girim Yat Kapatamaham Bande Shri Gurundina Tarinam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram. Good morning. Hare Krishna. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Purana, Canto 10, Samam Bonam, Chapter 69, verse 25, 26, 27. So we'll chant 25 together, and then I'll stumble through 26 and 27 without your help. Please repeat. Kwapi Sandhyam Upasinam Japantam Brahma Vagyatam Ekatra Kasi Karmabhya Karantam Asivartmasu. Does anyone know the meter? Jai, thank you. Kwapi Sandhyam Upasinam Japantam Brahmavagyatam Ekatra Kasi Karmabhyam Karantam Ashi Vartmasu Kwapi Sandhyam Upasinam Vapantam Brahmavagyatam Ekatra Chasi Charambayam Charantam Asi Vartmasu Kwapi Sandhyam Upasinam Japantam Brahmavagyatam Ekatra Chasi Charambayam Charanam tamasi vardmasu. Please chant. Sandhyamapasinam. Qua api, somewhere. Sandhyam, the rituals of sunset. Upasinam, worshipping. Japantam, quietly chanting. Brahma, the Vedic mantra, Gayatri. Gayatri. Vakyatam, controlling his speech. Ekatra, in one place. Cha, and. Asi, with sword. Charambayam, and shield. Charanam, charantam, moving about. Asi, vartmasu, in the corridors, set aside for sword practice. Translation and purport by the disciples of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Translation. Somewhere, Lord Krishna was observing the rituals for worship at sunset by refraining from speech and quietly chanting the Gayatri mantra. And elsewhere, he was moving about with sword and shield in the areas set aside for sword practice. Do we have an area set aside for sword practice? Oh, okay, cool. Good. Purport. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the words Sandhyam Upasinam indicate sunset rituals, whereas the words Asi Charambyam Charantam refer to sword practice, which takes place at dawn. Ashvirgajairatai Kwapi Vicharantam Gadagrajam Kwachich Chayanam Prayanke Stuyamanam Chavandibihi. In one place, Lord Gadagraja was riding on horses, elephants, and chariots, and in another place, he was resting on his bed while bards recited his glories. Purport. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti points out that riding on horses and elephants is a noon activity, whereas one lies down during the latter part of the night. Mantrayantam cha kasmin Shin mantribis kodavabdibihi jalakridaratam kwapi paramukya balavritam. Translation: somewhere he was consulting with royal ministers like Uddhava, and somewhere else he was enjoying in the water, surrounded by many society girls and other young women. Purport: this translation is based on Srila Prabhupada's Krishna book. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, Lord Krishna met with his counselors around dusk and enjoyed water sports in the afternoon. So this chapter is really interesting because Narada Muni is a brahmachari, and he's going from one of Krishna's palaces to another of Krishna's palaces. Palace after palace after palace. And what's Krishna doing in his palace? Is with his wives. What are his wives doing? What are his children doing? Which is strange subjects for a brahmachari to be inquiring about. Usually brahmacharis don't inquire about household life. However, because it's Narada Muni inquiring about Krishna, it's perfectly okay. So we're hearing about Krishna's palaces inside of one of Krishna's palaces. And we're very, very fortunate for this. How many people get to sit and hear this topic in such a place, in this age, or in any age really? We're so fortunate that Kishore has let us come here to hear about his glories. Narada Muni had to undergo a lot of austerity and purification. He's a very, very elevated being. And that's how he was able to enter into all of Krishna's palaces without getting stopped abruptly by guards or booted out. And we're so fortunate we don't have to go through quite that level of refinement that Narada Muni does just to be able to enter into Krishna's palace. So, Krishna is here. He's doing things. He's not just standing playing his flute, looking very beautiful. Someone pointed out the other day, yeah, well, the temple's nice, but Krishna's looking south. Deities aren't really supposed to face south. So actually, he's not facing south. We're in the northern part of Chicago. So he's presiding over the whole of Chicago. You can see everything that's going on, Navy Pier, the Miracle Mile. Everything he's watching. Might not seem like it, he's come in this very young form. He's very attractive and sweet. But he's seeing what's going on, both as the super soul and as Kishore. So Narada Muni is described as being eager to see Krishna. We also have to have some level of eagerness to come here. It can be quite austere in the winters, coming here or being here or going through the process to get here. I remember before I was fortunate to reside here, just how long of a journey it was to get here. Quite the distance to travel. But now, we've become so fortunate. He lets us reside if we are qualified and we so choose to do so, and even lets unqualified people reside sometimes here, like myself. This is Krishna's special mercy. This is Prabhupada's special mercy. That in an age where we might not be so qualified, we get the mercy to make up the difference. This was Mahaprabhu's mood. Let's just give mercy. So Narada Muni was really amazed that each place he went, Krishna was doing a different activity. Not just he was doing a different activity with different people in a different place. He was doing different activities that take place at different times of the day. Krishna's pastimes aren't whimsically performed. There's lots of order. There's the eightfold pastimes. I think there's with the cowherd boys, there's fivefold pastimes. There's a nice book from our dear Dasarath Sutta Prabhu called Cowherd Boy Nectar that goes all into the pastimes of Krishna and the cowherd boys, what they're doing at this very moment. It's a very exciting book. There's similarly uh, books describing his other pastimes throughout the day. But we can see from this chapter that Krishna is doing all things at what appears to be all times of the day. Even though Narada Muni is going from one palace to another in succession, he's not going morning, afternoon, night, morning, afternoon, night. It's almost sporadic how these pastimes are happening. Like I said, Krishna doesn't do his pastimes whimsically. He has this mystic potency that whatever pastime he's doing, it's the appropriate time of day to do that pastime. This is, to me, mildly or very inconceivable, but that's the potency of Krishna. So if you talk to someone who's not a devotee, even if they're, pious and following some other religious system, if you tell them today in the morning we have a morning class every day, and today we studied what God does every day, yeah, right. How do you know? The Buddhists can't in any way, shape, or form conceptualize that God is a person. And the Muslims say, yes, he's a person, but he's so great, so wonderful, so mystical, we can't describe him in any way, shape, or form. It's just it's all very blurry and misty and mystical to us. And the Christians say, yes, God is a person. He's our Father, and he's very old looking. And he has a kingdom that he lives in. But they can't really go into detail. Streets paved with gold is about the best they can get when we ask for details as to apparently he has a beard too, so a long white one is kind of flowing, pretty majestic. But I could never, I grew up as a Christian. I could never conceive why, if God is the all-powerful, omniscient, omnipotent, why would he be old? I get it, he's the oldest, but why would he look old? Isn't he beyond the power of aging? If you're God, do you really have to age if you're God? It never really clicked. But here we find out some of the more intimate details of God, and we find out that yes, God doesn't have to age because he is God, and he's not old. He's ever youthful. He doesn't really, in terms of looks, God doesn't age past about the age of 16. Even in his later Leelas, when he was present, Krishna still looked 16 years old. And there's so many people using so many bizarre combinations of the material nature in the form of chemicals and other unsavory things, rubbing it all over their skin and drinking it, injecting it, whatever, just trying to look, 5-10 years younger. And then there's Krishna, who's the oldest, older. He says, never was there a time when I did not exist. So how do you put an age on that? And he's eternally youthful. So this is, just another one of Krishna's wonderful attributes. But most people don't have a level of purity to be able to enter into this more esoteric knowledge. Just accepting that there is God and he's a person is not a very common thing in this day and age. Atheism is growing, and impersonalism is growing, And even worse, Mayavad philosophy is growing. So many people have so many misconceptions because, as a rule of thumb, we're very contaminated in this age. So if we're contaminated, then we don't have the qualification necessary to understand. The qualification to become a surgeon is first you have to be a doctor. You have to know about the human body. You can't be a mathematician and say, well, I have a master's. I think I'll go get my doctorate in surgery and start cutting people. No, you know numbers. You don't know humans. So we have to have some level of qualification to start knowing these things. The qualification to be a doctor, you have to go to medical school. The qualification for medical school, you have to, start the college process. You have to finish high school. You have to be literate. There's so many qualifications that one has to undergo for mundane knowledge. Of course, there's qualifications to understand spiritual knowledge. And this book that we're studying, these are intimate things that are being talked about. So we're not reading an entry-level book. This isn't Bhagavad Gita. This is Srimad Bhagavatam. It's the graduate study. So it's going to have things that are a little more esoteric. It's going to have deeper revelations. It's going to have more things for us to understand in detail than, say, the Bhagavad Gita, which is considered by authorities to be more entry-level. This is why usually we give someone a Bhagavad Gita on book distribution. Although the first 8 chapters of the Bhagavatam are very nice to give people as well. So in the entry level, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, unintelligent men who don't know me perfectly think that I, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, was impersonal before and have now assumed this personality. Due to their small knowledge, they do not know my higher nature, which is imperishable and supreme. I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them, I am covered by my internal potency, and therefore they do not know that I am unborn and infallible. This is 7th chapter of the Gita, 24 and 25. So, unqualified, unintelligent people, when we tell them, yes, God rides horses and elephants and fights with swords in designated areas, they say, oh, this is mythology. It's a nice story. It's this, it's that. Because they don't have the intelligence, like Krishna says in the Gita. They'll never understand that this is actually going on because their lack of intelligence. I'll never have the understanding of an economist because I don't know how numbers work. I know 2 plus 2 equals 4. And an economist also knows 2 plus 2 equals 4, but he knows a lot more than that. So we can see kind of the basic principle, but we're not going to be able to understand deeper than that without the proper qualification. And to realize that God is a person is the highest revelation. It's the topmost knowledge. And it's kind of hard to conceive sometimes because I'm a person. I don't have, a fraction of the potency that God does. All I have is warped reflection. That's the nature of the material world, though, is I just get the warped reflection at best. And a lot of people aren't given this opportunity for one reason or another because of purity. That's why Srila Prabhupada says purity is the force. It's the driving force behind this movement is having purity. And that's why we have to read, 50% of the Bhagavatam, maybe more? We have to read 9 cantos out of 12 before we can start to hear about Krishna. And yes, there's other pastimes much earlier in the Bhagavatam. There's even a little bit about Krishna in the beginning of the Bhagavatam. There's, Kapila Dev and Nrsimha Dev and Lord Ram all leading up to Krishna's pastimes. But there's so much information leading up to the 10th canto that we have to understand in, one form or another to be able to qualify to hear and to understand in any capacity uh, the 10th canto. And this is, again, why Narada is able to go from palace to palace, because he was incredibly pure. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to go. So Krishna says in the Gita that whenever religious principles decline, he says, I come myself to reestablish them. And Prabhupada says in the purport to that, it's not only on Indian soil that Krishna comes. He can come any time, place, and circumstance that he desires. He chooses to give us a heads up when he's coming. But even then, sometimes we're not quite awake enough to realize, oh, Krishna is coming. Krishna has came. And he comes to teach religious principles according to time, place, and circumstance. Either he comes himself or he sends his representative. That's why Lord Buddha came. He came and preached time, place, and circumstance. People were using the Vedas to follow, the rituals and for sacrifice. This was a misunderstanding. And that's why the Buddha, quote unquote, rejected the Vedas to get people to begin to follow Vedic principles. And it was only in that way that he would be able to do that, by saying, no, don't do this. Come over here and do this instead. It's kind of a switcheroo, And this is why when Muhammad came, he didn't describe the personal form of the Lord, because the region that he descended in is more degraded than other regions, so they aren't able to qualify to understand that God has a form that we can conceive of. And this is why when Jesus came, he said, yes, God is a person. He's the Father. He's my Father. And he kind of stopped at that, because those people also aren't capable of synthesizing anything beyond that. But when Mahaprabhu came, he had a slightly different mood. And he said, open up the floodgates, give pure love of God to everybody. In that same Gita purport is where Prabhupada mentions, he says, just like in math, in basic math, 2 + 2 = 4, that principle remains in advanced math as well. So the principles are always the same. If we use our intelligence and look, okay, what are the principles these people are following? It's going to be the same. It's just going to be expressed differently for time, place, and circumstance. It's a very logical thing, too. Each language, there's a certain syntax rule for each language, how the words are arranged. So Hridayananda Maharaj explains that Sanskrit, if you read it backwards, you get an almost coherent English sentence. And if you read it forwards, usually you're pretty confused. So just on that alone, we can understand why you have to explain things differently for different regions, because the languages work different. When language works different, scientists say that means people think in a different process. They're still thinking most of the time, but they're thinking in a slightly different way, depending on where the verbs and the adverbs and all of those articles fall into a sentence. And not just that, but some people are material attached. They're bewildered, they're covered, and it's not terribly attractive. It's not a terribly attractive proposal, or not necessarily a good idea. Somebody that's, envious or lusty or greedy, or, any of these negative qualities, it's not a good idea to give them more fuel for that fire, because that fire is not getting them closer to Krishna. It's taking them further away. But when Narada Muni goes, we have as covered beings, we have the propensity to think, how is Krishna doing this? Why is Krishna doing this? Is he really doing this? But Narada Muni sees things in a different way. Because of his level of purity, he's thinking, how is it possible that Krishna is doing this all the time? I want to go see. He's not doubting, he's mystified. And then he's inquisitive, not jealous that Krishna can do so many things at so many different times. So it's a natural question to ask, but how we ask it makes all the difference. And it depends on our covering. Narada Muni, not so much covered, so he's asking purely, let me see how Krishna is doing these things. And we're more aggressively interrogating. Is Krishna really doing this? Are we sure? I don't think so. I don't know. How can he do that? Because I don't think he can. And it's for that reason that a lot of people can only comprehend God as impersonal. Due to our study of the Gita before we study Bhagavatam, though, we can see God as a person. Krishna says, I'm a person in the Gita, the supreme person. Srila Prabhupada, across all of his books, when they were digitized, they were able to do these really, unique calculations. And they figured out what verses he quoted the most. They also figured out what phrases he used the most. And in his book, A Living Theology of Krishna Bhakti, Tamal Krishna Goswami calls it the Mahuvacha, or the thing that Prabhupada said most. He said it tens of thousands of times across his purports and writings and lectures and conversations. Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead. The number is something like 80,000 times. Prabhupada uses this phrase, Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead. So we can understand if somebody repeats it a lot. In Sanskrit and in the Vedas, if something's repeated thrice, then it's very significant. Haranam, 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 Eva Kevalam, like that. So if somebody does it 80-something thousand times, it might be worth taking note that Krishna is a person. He's the supreme person. And this is explained by Krishna to Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita. He explains the nature of the universe, the difference between material and spiritual, the time factor, the difference between the body and the soul, the different yoga processes, the different processes of knowledge, the three modes of nature, the soul. And this is like preliminary level study. And then we enter the Bhagavatam, which is the graduate level study, which explains the nature of the world, the nature of the atom. And there's a chapter in the Bhagavatam called Calculation of Time from the Atom. It's the most precise way anybody has ever tried to measure time, is the amount of time it takes a ray of sunlight to cross an atom, all the way up to yuga cycles and the lifespan of Lord Brahma. It's a very, very scientific process to go from something that minuscule to something that large. So it's a little bit more than just entry level. It's very in-depth study. And we also learn the nature of the soul, how the soul takes birth, how the soul gets a human birth. And it's explained both literally and through analogies, And it's explained over and over again, all of these things, so we can understand it. Because what works for my understanding might not work for somebody else's understanding. The Bhagavatam is very merciful in that it can explain to all varieties of people if they listen attentively. But a lot of people study books like the Upanishads and not the Gita Upanishad. So they're studying the Upanishads. They might not have the intelligence for that, and then they reach the wrong conclusions. For example, the Ishopanishad, There's commentators that will skip over the first part because it talks about, everything is controlled by Krishna. It's kind of confusing. And they skip over the end where the devotee's praying, Lord, please remove your effulgence so that I can see you. And they focus on the middle verses, which speak about nescience. And in the Western world, the Bible says God's the Father. He has a kingdom, doesn't go into detail. But our acharyas are so merciful that they illuminate much more detail than that. They tell us point blank, these pastimes are not stories. These things actually happened. They're currently happening. They're always happening. It's not fantasy. It's not a comic book. It's not mythology. It's not conjecture. It's not a really, really vivid imagination. It's the eternal pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Since we know that Krishna is a person, we can understand why he isn't revealed in other scriptures. Just go out on the street and talk to somebody and see where their mind is at. People have so many qualities in Kali Yuga that aren't savory, full of lust, anger, greed, envy. And, if somebody comes knocking on your door, who are you? Oh, I'm lusty. No thanks. Oh, I'm envious. No, I'm greedy. I'm very greedy. That's okay. Please don't come in. So why would Krishna invite these people into these very intimate pastimes? You don't just go into somebody's home without first knowing their name at the very least. Usually you kind of get to know a person before you go into their home. So why would the Supreme Person just let anybody in? It's not logical. And if he's anything, Krishna has some logic, because he gives us what little logic we have. And the problem is we have a tendency to try to be Krishna. And that's why we came here, so that we can try to enjoy. We all want to be, this, that, or the other. I am this. I am in charge of this. I am doing that. I created this person, place, thing, or circumstance. But we don't actually have the ability. It's a Bhagavad Gita thing. The soul is not the doer. Very, very easy to understand. But Mahaprabhu has a slightly different mood. He gives us a method of purification so that we can begin to understand things. Because all the other systems of yoga we're not really capable of doing. I don't know anyone that lives much beyond 100 years. And if you can't live 100 years, you can't do austerity for 10,000 years. I can't sit still for very long. So how am I going to hold a posture for 10 hours or 10 minutes, let alone 10,000 years without eating, because I sure like to eat, without drinking water, without, opening my mouth and hearing what spews out, let alone when ants build their hive around my body and begin to eat it. And this is a demon I'm describing. Hiranyakashipu stood for 10,000 years. When Brahma came to find him to give him his benediction, he was covered in an anthill and his body was half eaten by the ants. I get one ant crawling across me and I freak out, That's more trauma from growing up in the Southwest where all the ants sting and it hurts really bad. But still, if it was a cockroach, I'd have the same reactions. At best. So this is not terribly common knowledge. And everybody in this room hearing has undergone some level of purification beyond all of the people not hearing. And when I say the people in this room hearing, I also mean the people online hearing. That even the folks across the street, they're very nice people. but they just can't, they haven't quite got to the point where they can go into the more intimate side of things. And here's why. One example is almost every home that Narada enters, Krishna worships him the way that you do when somebody enters your home in a Vedic society. We don't necessarily do this now, uh, but at that time, when somebody would come to your home, you would worship them, you would wash their feet. And Krishna washes Narada Muni's feet. And then he sprinkles the water on his head. This is very difficult to understand. But Krishna always honors Brahmins, and he always honors them properly, and not that he's honoring, the caste Brahmin people. But we know that Brahmin isn't something you're born into, it's based on quality. And Krishna is always honoring people who possess these nice qualities. Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmanya Hitaya Cha. Go Brahmanya for the cows and Brahmins, Hitaya, beneficial, Cha also. He's also beneficial to the cows and the Brahmins. And he honors people who cleanse their heart and try to give ideal leadership to society, not people who have very dirty, contaminated hearts who try to control society in such a way that they benefit or their friends benefit for it, which is what we have for a leadership class now. And an instructing class of people now is everybody's thinking about I, me, mine, like George Harrison so poetically pointed out to us all through the day. I, me, mine, I, me, mine, I, me, mine, all through the night. I, me, mine, I, me, mine, I, me, mine. Krishna's speech is described as it's as sweet as nectar, and we can kind of conceptualize this too. Mango nectar is very sweet, and there's so many other fruit nectars that are very sweet, but somebody's speech can be even sweeter than that. Not an easy thing to contextualize or conceptualize or understand. Krishna is the master of mystic powers. But he always gives respect where it's due. And so often nowadays, people reach a certain post and they become very proud and they think they are the controller. And they don't want to offer improper respect to anyone, let alone proper respect to the people that deserve it. And Krishna is always exemplifying, perfectly how people are supposed to act. In one verse, he's consulting with Uddhava. Another verse, he's practicing sword fighting in designated areas. You don't want to do that in the lobby or people might get hurt. But these are things that Kshatriyas do. So he's, showing what the ruling class should be doing. I don't think a vast majority of our presidents have served in the military for quite some time. I think Kennedy was the last one. Things didn't work out so well for him. He was a philanderer and, all the other things that happened to him. So even, okay, he served in the military. That's half decent. Whatever else he did, it didn't work out. Another house he's enjoying with society girls. That's just ripe for misinterpretation, and everybody knows why. But everything Krishna's doing, he's doing it perfectly because he is perfect. He is Krishna. So Krishna's giving us these glimpses into his personality. This is very intimate knowledge, We might have known somebody for, an extended period of time. But if it's only in passing, we don't know anything about them. And even people that we've known for a very long time, we might not know them deeply or intimately or personally. For one reason or another, we might not take the time. There might not be a connection where somebody's inspired to reveal these things to other people. There's things I tell my own mother, who's known me since I was born, believe it or not. And I tell her, and she goes, "Wow, I didn't know that about you." And this is my mother. The only person that's known me as long as her is my father. And I can say even more things to him. He goes, "Wow, I didn't know that about you." Uh, so we have to have qualification to understand another person. Whatever that qualification is. First, we have to know their name and what they look like. Those two things are usually pretty handy when we're getting to know somebody. And then we can more, 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 and more. So we have to know Krishna. We have to know Krishna as a person. We have to know he's the supreme person. We have to know all of this other information before we can start to know about what he's doing, so that we can become qualified. Everything in this world is about qualification. You can't drive a car if you've never seen one before. You can't drive a car if the authorities don't know that you can drive one safely. If the authority, the Department of Motor Vehicles, doesn't know that, okay, this person is sane enough to operate a motor vehicle in a way that will not kill others, save for accidentally, they're not going to allow you the privilege to drive. And then the pseudo kshatriyas, called the police, are going to stop you as soon as they figure out this person should not be driving. So it's the same thing with Krishna's pastimes. We might hear things, and think, "Oh, that's nice." But when we hear from acharyas and we apply a little bit of brain grease, then we can start to understand things a little more deeply. Oh, Krishna's doing whatever. That's nice. No, this is Krishna's personality. These are the things he likes to do. In Vraja Leela, he likes to eat sweets with his friends. He likes to tease gopis. He likes to take care of the cows. He likes to sometimes harass his parents for different things. He has so many things that he likes to do because he's a person. People have things they like. And so does Krishna, because he is the supreme person. We have to consider, though, I have so many improprieties, imperfections, or things that are blocking the mirror of the heart. So how is it that I can start to understand these pastimes? It's through the mercy of Mahaprabhu that we're able to begin entering into these pastimes in any way, shape, or form. It's through the mercy of the acharyas, through the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, through the mercy of our spiritual masters and their representatives, that we're able to even start hearing these things. If it wasn't for Srila Prabhupada, who knows if there would be an English Bhagavatam worth reading. The odds are slim. Because these scriptures are very, very rare. During Bhakti Vinod's time, he wanted to study Chaitanya Charitamrita, and it wasn't readily available. It took him a very long time to find one. There were books that weren't available at all during Bhakti Vinod's time. Some of them have actually been found since then, uh, and they've been translated and transcribed and all of this. Some books won't be available for the rest of Kali Yuga because they've been placed into Grantha Samadhis, because they're too esoteric for us to understand. A lot of the works of Rupa Goswami are far beyond 99.9% of people's comprehension, and the 0.1% of people who can understand these without perversion kind of miss out because everybody else is kind of contaminated. So this is going on. So many people try to translate the Bhagavad Gita, but they're ineligible to understand anything past about the 6th chapter. You know, we have the famous Radhakrishnan Gita that was used before Prabhupada worked on his, and he said, no, the translations are acceptable, but don't read the purports. And there's a couple of his disciples that said, I wonder why. And then they read the purports and read that it says, not unto Krishna, but the void is what we're supposed to surrender unto. And they said, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense why we're not supposed to read this. It's the exact opposite of what Swamiji's teaching. So if somebody's incapable of perceiving, you know, 7th, 8th, 9th, the 10th chapter, 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, then how are they anywhere near qualified to understand Srimad Bhagavatam, which is so much more voluminous, so much more esoteric than the Bhagavad Gita? So if we want to know, what is Krishna doing? How is he doing it? Why is he doing it? And with whom is he doing it? We have to become qualified. If you want to know what's going on in the electrical room of the Willis Tower, first you must understand how to be around electricity. And even then, you have to be qualified to enter by the authorities of the building. If you want to know if Joe Biden takes a nap after lunch, you can't just drive over to the White House and, hey, is Joe taking a nap? They're not going to appreciate that. You can't even get on the front lawn of the White House, let alone go up to the door and knock on it, let alone go inside and see what's going on. What's going on in somebody's house is a private thing. Even, you know, our neighbors over there in the apartment complex, you just can't go open somebody's door. Oh, I always wondered what this building looked like on the inside. You can't go to the rectory across the street and start snooping around. You know, oh, I see the lamp in your window. I always wondered what else was in there. It doesn't work like that, so it's not going to work like that for Krishna. But the nature of Krishna is that he's so merciful, and the nature of Mahaprabhu is that he's even more merciful, that he's giving an opportunity to the unqualified. And Mahaprabhu is asking us to help him and give opportunity to even more people. Without Mahaprabhu's mercy, and without the mercy of the disciplic succession, none of us would be here. This is an incontestable statement. So if they're doing something very nice for us, then the least we can do is reciprocate in the way that they request us to. And that means going out and trying to share the message of Krishna consciousness with as many people as we can, as we are requested. So I have, we've made it through 6 pages of notes. I have 1 or 2 more, but we are having 0 minutes left. So if there are any questions, we can take those.
I'll start from the ending part where you were saying something in regards to people just casually coming into other facilities of worship. And were you trying to say here somehow people feel that they can just come casually in any kind of state? Is that what you're trying to say, as opposed to them somehow having the wherewithal that it's just not appropriate in those other environments?
No,
Okay.
but this is going on. So, and Prabhupada was so merciful. People are, you know, this is a very, this tradition has strictures of how people should dress and act and behave. But that wasn't a consideration for Srila Prabhupada. He allowed the personality who would later become Yamuna Devi to show up in a miniskirt in the 26th Second Avenue Temple. So if he had, said, no, you cannot come like this, who's to say there would have been a Yamuna Devi if he just rejected her over something so minuscule as an external, like, dress? Because not very long after that, Yamuna traded in the miniskirt for a sari and then never went back. So we can't just reject somebody based on an external that is a reflection of their lack of refinement, like coming in a miniskirt or jeans or tattered clothing or whatever it may be, low class behavior. The point of the Krishna consciousness movement, this is one of my later notes, fifth chapter of the first canto. This literature is full of transcendental words directed towards bringing about a revolution in the impious lives of the world's misdirected civilization. So we should expect that people are going to come here not knowing how to act properly. We should expect they're going to come here not knowing how to dress properly, not knowing what the etiquette is. But it's our job to kindly and gently teach them.
You know, I feel we've turned people away at the door. They were a little drunk or whatever, but they come back several times because I believe they were sincerely drawn by the spiritual. And in those other institutes, yes, they have extreme, strict, you're not coming in, period. That's just, but I think we could also be taken advantage of because if you've been coming for 5, 6, 7 years and you're still trying to do the same thing, there's a little balance. But we are on a much higher level. So they don't want to, as they use the word judge, and today it's just become a cliche as an excuse almost. It's not always judging, it's just common sense, and we're an intelligent spiritual practice. So you want to be clean, physically pure. You don't want to smell like marijuana. You don't want to take a bath. And that's just wherever you go. But I just wanted you to speak on that because somehow people are very loose when they come. And then they're just expecting, okay, they're up here and they don't care how we are. But your heart, you have to tell yourself to use your better judgment. You can grab a scarf and cover your hips or whatever, or go to the dollar store or whatever and grab a scarf. But yeah, I've seen swimsuit tops with sand from the beach on their backs. I've seen all of that. And I guess they really wanted to make it here. But they weren't turned away because, in Islam, that would never happen.
Well, it's not a disqualification for us, but Prabhupada does give disqualifications to come into the temple. He says one must be 50% sane to practice Krishna consciousness. So if you're 49%, here, have some prasad and try again next birth. It's some things we can't work with. If somebody refuses to accept principles, we can't help them. If they won't stop taking intoxicants, if they won't stop having sex, if they won't stop doing whatever else that doesn't follow our principles, we can't help them. Submission is required to practice Krishna consciousness. We have to submit to the authority, which is Srila Prabhupada, and we have to do what he tells us to do. No meat eating, no illicit sex, no intoxication, no gambling, and then the other things can follow. Then we can start dressing nicely, we can start chanting Hare Krishna, so on and so forth. So we have the grounds to dismiss somebody. I've been listening to Hayagriva's book, A Hare Krishna Explosion, and he's describing how in San Francisco, during the peak of everything that was going on in Haight-Ashbury, LSD culture was so prominent that if somebody came in and they were high, because this happened, they were high and they're saying, "I'm God," and Prabhupada was talking, "I'm God." Prabhupada kept, "I'm God." and they didn't remove him, because if they did that, then the hippie society would more or less reject them, because people who were uh, whacked out of their minds were considered elevated persons, because the people were very degraded. So this is what they thought an elevated person was. And Timothy Leary didn't help with all of his bogus philosophy. Um, so they tolerated, and then eventually, when the guy didn't get engaged, he left on his own accord. Paramatma said, "Okay, it's time to get out of here. You've made your scene. Now leave." Things were even different in the New York temple. That wouldn't have been tolerated. Brahmananda was, a very large gentleman and would have removed them promptly. Um, so we have to use our intelligence, but we also have to realize, okay, there's some people we can't engage with for whatever reason.
So it's basically discernment, because it could distract. Let's say it's a lecture or a class. It could, and let's say the person possessed or has a demoniac situation going on. That could be the intent, to distract or to remove what is trying to be absorbed at that moment. I have seen a lot of situations, but I truly feel everyone that's made it to our door was led by the Spirit to be here and to seek. And I know there was a guy that was a drinking pipe guy. He literally tried to walk. He walked through the door, and he was at the door, and he was peeking and looking around. Next thing, his feet were off, and he had his shoes on. And I said, "Oh no!" And I jumped up. I walked over, and I said, "Oh no, this is the Holy Spirit. So he backed up, and everyone's looking at me like, "He's huge. He looks like me." I don't have any fear about that, and I think they know your spirit. I have almost zero trouble when I'm around those kind of people, as scary as it is. I don't think about it. My sons are always trouble because of the things I do, but he probably is a dangerous person. And he kept coming, but he was rejected. And then when they're rejected in a harsh way, then that's when they do something bad. When I hear these stories about, oh, they tore this up, but they were rejected because they weren't so pretty or so sophisticated. But many of them aren't really doing it. But when you're disrupting our structure, that's where I have the problem. Because if you're coming here to sit and absorb, you don't have to talk or you don't have to, because there's some essence here.
Well, we don't even have to use such an extreme example. I know people who, you know, teach very regularly. They're very advanced devotees. And if a baby begins crying, it causes a disruption in a much different and also somewhat similar way as a person who is intoxicated causes. It disrupts the devotees who are trying to hear nicely. It disrupts the speaker who is trying to speak nicely and glorify Krishna. And it's not properly addressing the needs of the child if the child is just left to cry during the lecture. So it's, on all accounts, it's not a good thing. So these personalities, a lot of them that I know, will, in one way or another, ask a parent to attend to the child. Prabhupada said child worship is more important than deity worship. But it's not just for the child, it's for the hearers, it's for the speaker, it's for everybody that we address a crying child. In the same way, we should address somebody who comes in and, you can say, disturbs the sanctity, whether it's intentional or unintentional or demonic or accidental. We have to address them in a proper way. So some people make a disturbance unknowingly, and that has to be addressed one way. Some people make a disturbance knowingly, and that should be addressed another way. And some people in the Hari Bhakti Vilasa says to worship without following the injunctions of the Vedas is causing a disturbance in society. So there's people doing that, causing a disturbance in another way. And that has to be also addressed in a much different way than you would address somebody who's a belligerent drunk. or a child. You're not going to address any of these people remotely the same way. But we have to address these things because we have standards to maintain. Just like somebody who isn't showering or is doing something else, we have standards. We're trying to become purified. And to do that, we have to follow standards. And we can't allow the standards to regress. The standards have to be ever increasing if we want to be more and more purified. But we also have to be appropriate with it, according to time, place, and circumstance. Just like the LSD example, what would work in one center would get them outed in the other center because there was only two centers at the time. So we have to use our intelligence. We have this human intelligence. It's very high on the hierarchy of 8.4 million species, from tree consciousness to human consciousness. Huge leap. So we have to engage that, both for understanding Krishna and for dealing with people, both little and big and intoxicated and whining.
Oh, there was something very quickly. You were speaking of the direction of the temples, and and many scriptures say east. Some say we should pray north, and you did mention that there are people speaking that our deities are facing south. So you were trying to elaborate on that a little bit.
This is part of what's called Vastu, which is Vedic feng shui for the people who've heard of one but not the other. So it gives prescriptions for what rooms should be where in a house and what rooms shouldn't be where. So, for example, I think it's the northeast corner of the farm in Houston. There is a bathroom. And this is very bad because Vishnu resides in that corner, according to Vastu. So they have ceased operations in that bathroom out of respect for Lord Vishnu. And Vastu also prescribes which way deities should be facing in a temple. But Krishna, being transcendental, he chose this building, knowing full well which way he would be facing. And as far as I can surmise, it's his decision to put himself there, acted out by his devotees. And he, as far as I can tell, wanted to be presiding over the city of Chicago by watching them.
So are we an
facing south.
example, are we not like the others? That's what
This temple is not following proper Vastu because Krishna is facing south. Other temples he is usually facing east. I know the Naperville temple he faces east. Houston temple they face. I'm just trying to go off of memory where I can remember north, south, east, and west in temples that I visited, which is very few for some reason. I think Houston they face north. Yeah, it must be north. So there's an acceptable standard, and then there is we can just say, oh, this is bad, or we can give Krishna a little credit.
And whatever, because I studied various religions, and Christianity doesn't necessarily, as long as you're on your knees praying and all of that, but most of the others say east, north, or something. So you don't think it's affecting us?
Well, this is what I'm talking about, that other religions have different levels of refinement and understanding based on purity and ability to understand. Um, but like I said, we can either say this is bad and it shouldn't be like this, the example of Kishore Kishori facing south, or we can accept that Krishna Ishavasimidam Sarvam, that he's doing what he's doing. And he's Ishvar, he's the controller, he's guiding devotees, and he picked this building and he wanted to be facing south because he's Krishna and Krishna can do what he wants. He's not held to the laws of Vastu. If Krishna wants to do something, he's going to do it. This is why he eats dirt. This is why he eats with his left hand. This is why he takes his father's shoes and puts them on his head. These things aren't supposed to be done, but Krishna does it anyway because he is Krishna. So we can either say, yes, we're not following Vastu, or we can say Krishna is doing what Krishna wants because he's Krishna. This is my interpretation of it. And this is the, just a brief example of Krishna doing what he wants. He wanted to be here, otherwise he wouldn't be here. You know, there was, for example, talking about Krishna doing what he wants, aside from other people's wills, you know, the Radha Landanishwar story. He didn't want to be with those people in a crate. He wanted to be with Prabhupada. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to find Radha Krishna deities in London in, 1968 or 9? It just wasn't a thing. Another story is when the Mayapur Nrsimhadev deity was carved, somebody offered double or triple or quadruple what the devotees were going to pay. He demanded that he buy that deity, and he wasn't going to take no for an answer. And somehow or other, Krishna gave the Murtiwala, the carver of the deity, the intelligence to more or less trick him into not taking it because he was convinced he was going to take it. And then the devotees ended up with the deity like they were supposed to. So Krishna is always, as I said, Krishna is always doing his pastimes. He's not a statue, he's a person who has come as a statue. He's still doing things. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Kantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.